Good morning, everybody. I've been quite challenged recently to go back to the book of Acts and have a look at what the early church was like. Um, how did what did their days look like? What were the sorts of things they felt were important to talk about? So I found myself in Acts chapter 9 and following particularly Peter at the moment, and how he was actually speaking of Jesus and what he was doing, part of his journey. I thought, let's look at Peter. So I was looking at chapter 9, and at the end it talks about him going to a place called Lydda. And it says when he was in Lydda, he actually found a man called Aeneas. Now, this gentleman had been bedridden for 8 years, I think it says 8 years, yes. And Peter goes up to him and he calls him by name and he says, Aeneas, get up, take up your mat and get up. And of course, that rings lots of bells, doesn't it? Because you think, well, he's followed Jesus while Jesus was doing his ministry on earth, and he would have seen Jesus say those words to, for example, the paralytic that was let down through the roof. And Peter would have watched Jesus day to day and seen how he spoke to people, how he called people by their names, and how he, encouraged them and prayed, get up, and they did. And so that's what Peter did. And then the next account that we see, a few verses on, is that he's in a place called Joppa, and this is where Tabitha lives, and Tabitha has died, and he gets called by some of the people that knew her, and to say that she died. So he goes to the house, and again it's really reminiscent of Jairus's daughter, where he goes to where the dead woman lies. He gets on his knees, he prays, and then he says, Tabitha, get up. And she gets up, and she's raised from the dead. And again you think, gosh, Peter he's been watching closely, and he's following Jesus, and this is what he's doing day to day. And then you also hear then that he stays there for a few days in Joppa, and I don't know whether people would have wanted him to stay with them. I mean, he just touched a dead body, which would have made him unclean, or whether he would have had a lot of people saying, hey, come and stay with me. But it's interesting where he does stay, because the account says he stays in the house of Simon the tanner in Joppa. Now, a tanner was somebody who dealt with dead animals. Nobody wanted to live next to a tanner. For example, I mean, the whole house would have smelled. So tanners were quite often lived at the edge of the town, and as we read here, the Simon the tanner lives by the sea. They probably wanted him as far away from the town as they could, because the smell of dead animals, and how he had to remove the hides and whatever you do. Malcolm will know all this stuff, I'm sure. But and that is where Simon chose to stay, and he stayed with him for a while. So that I found that interesting. And then the next we hear is the story of the Cornelius, the centurion, who then sends for Peter after having had the vision. And this time we hear that Peter himself has the vision, and he hears this voice saying, Peter, get up, to him. And it's interesting that the men that come to the house, when they come to find Peter to take him back to Cornelius, they wouldn't have come to the house because they were Gentiles. They would not have come in. It wouldn't have been appropriate. They would have stood by the gate. And it does say that they're by the gate. But the interesting thing is, it says Peter invited the men in. Now, that was quite unheard of. So he, as a Jew, invited them into his house, and it says he's to be his guests. They stayed overnight. He would have fed them. And then the next day he goes on his way. So I was really interested to watch that journey of Peter's, the bits that he'd watched Jesus do, the things he'd watched Jesus do down through the years, the things he thought, yeah, okay, I saw that. That's how I'm gonna pray. And then suddenly you get something a little bit different where he's staying with someone who would have been seen as unclean, and then off he goes to a Gentile's house, which is what he does the next day. He still doesn't know quite why he's going. He's pondering this vision that he's had, and it's all a little bit unsure. And I think sometimes for us it's just like, whoa, hang on. I get that bit, and I know that's how I can pray, but now this bit I'm not sure about. I've not come across this before. God, what do I do here? So God quite often gives me illustrations of things along those lines, where perhaps I might make a judgment about something that I don't quite understand. And he showed me a couple of examples that have happened recently. One was to do with the garden. Well, they were both to do with the garden, really. So in the garden we've had this plant that's been growing, and next to it I saw this really beautiful feathery stem that had come out of the plant, and I thought, wow, okay, it's doing something. At last we've got some interesting feathers coming out of it. So, but as I got closer, I realised actually it wasn't that at all. What it was a bit of grass that was feathery, and it was just it was a weed. It wasn't really supposed to be there at all. And my immediate response was, oh, it's just a bit of grass. That's not even what it's supposed to be doing. And I completely judged it. And rather than thinking, wow, this is a really beautiful feathery bit of grass, let's look at that a bit more closely, I just judged it. It's like, oh, that's not worth looking at. And then the next thing I saw was we went out for the day, Dick and I, and there was this beautiful little flower, sort of pinky white flower, really delicate. And I thought, what's this? And took a picture, really beautiful, loved it, took the picture, and I said to Dick, what is it? And he looked at it, he said, oh, that's bindweed. I'm like, what? It was only like an inch in diameter. I mean, I think of bindweed, these great big bell-like flowers, but no, it was this beautiful, delicate flower. And I thought, no, I'm still going to take a picture of it. It's so easy for me to think, oh, it's just bindweed. I'm just going to judge that as not important. So that made me smile, really. It's like when the birds come to the bird table, I'm like, oh, look at that lovely bullfinch. Oh, the robin, isn't it cute? Uh-oh, here comes a jackdaw. We don't want that here, do we? And with that can go. And it's just how quick we are to make judgments about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable. So anyway, what I wanted to leave you with was do go and have a look at those chapters in Acts 9 and 10 and read on. It's just, imagine yourself in the scene. It's fascinating to see Peter's journey as he follows Jesus, as he develops his ministry. But also ask yourself those questions. There may be things that you think, yeah, I get that. I know how to pray there. But if there are things that God is pointing at and thinking, what about that? What do you think about that one then? Just asking the Holy Spirit to help you to understand what God is trying to say in a situation where perhaps you feel a little bit uncomfortable. So that's the challenge I want to leave with you today. To ask God what it is that he might want to put the finger on as part of your your walk with him. Thank you. Bye-bye.